case. It's a million ways to fall in love with all of the mistakes. It's a perfect place to keep up with the pace and navigate a maze meticulously engineered to make a payday. Who are you? What's your deal? What you coming to take? Are you?
Well, hello and good morning, Heather.
Good morning.
Boss lady of MMA standing.
Yes.
Am I standing up and saying that correct?
Yes.
You're the boss lady. Let me take these glasses off because they're starting to fog up a little bit and like right in the corner. And it's like right where I have to look at.
Uh-huh.
That's very unprofessional of me. So let's get into first. Tell me a little bit about this name, Boss Lady of MMA. Why and how?
Yeah, so you'll see a lot of my handles on social media just say Boss Lady MMA. So what happened was back in 2010, I believe it was, my ex-husband and I had opened a gym up in Kelso, Washington. And we had a couple young amateur fighters as our employees, of course, taking care of the gym while we were away. And one of them would just, every time I would walk in, he's like, oh, there's the boss lady, there's the boss lady. And while we owned the gym, I actually took my one and only amateur fight, and I was told I need a nickname. And so it was Heather Boss Lady Standing. And so I just started using Boss Lady MMA as my handle because no one else really no one else had that. No one else had the MMA part on Boss Lady. Boss Lady is a common term, but yeah, so that's where that generated from.
Okay, so you said that you only had one MMA fight?
Correct. Yeah, I am not a fighter.
Yeah. So, but let me ask you this: Did you have a background in any kind of martial arts?
No. In fact, I was not a sports person growing up in high school or any of that. I got my letter being a wrestling mat hostess. I was a mat statistician, so my brother was a wrestler. So I had that. I watched some UFC, when Randy Couture and Chuck Liddell were on back in the day in the late 90s. And, that was what I had for history. So. Yeah.
So you just pretty much, pretty much just jumped into it.
I did, yes. My
like somebody said there.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I said my ex-husband was a professional fighter, and I had taken some classes, of course, of his, but yeah, it wasn't, I didn't have a whole lot in my repertoire.
Yeah, so that'd be like you watching the cooking channel and just deciding to go on like Gordon Ramsay's,
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, that's what a lot of people do.
Absolutely. It was not a highlight of my life, no. But it happened. I can say that the walk.
Yeah, so your husband was into MMA and he was a fighter, so you said? Your ex-husband?
Yeah, he was a professional fighter. He had done well in the local amateur scene here in Portland, Oregon, and one of our first dates was to the promotion that I work for right now, actually, currently. We went when it was Rumble at the Roseland 33 at the FCFF and at the Roseland Theater in Portland, and his brother was on the card. And so, that was my first time ever seeing a live amateur MMA show, and that was in 2008.
So your first date was a MMA show. So obviously you guys got married, so you must have gotten knocked out with love.
Yeah, you can call it what you want. I like to call it business, but yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Yeah. So you were sitting there saying that, you weren't into MMA. Is that how you got into it, or did you say you was working for?
No, that is how I got into it. Funny enough, when I was growing up, I wanted to be a wedding coordinator. And so I always make the joke that I'm still doing that in a different way. I'm still bringing two people together. They're still inefficient. Your family and friends come. But there's a winner at the end of it. That's the difference. But I love to event plan. I'm an event planner at heart. And so when him and I first started dating, he took a position as a matchmaker for the gym that he was going to. And they started putting on little smoker shows. And I just pretty much did all the behind the scenes supportive girlfriend stuff. I was doing the ticket sale stuff and the wristbands and just kind of doing all of that. And the best benefit that I had for him was my memory. If I met somebody, if I met a fighter, I could store that in my head with who the fighter was, their weight, stuff like that. And so there was many times that he'd be matchmaking. He's like, who is that guy? And I could just reel that off. And that was just, we worked really well together that way. Yeah. So.
Yeah. He knew the talent and you remember their names.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That always works. You know,
It
that's
does.
like me.
Yeah. It was beneficial. Yeah.
And that's like me and my wife. She remembers stuff and I don't.
Exactly.
So we're a perfect match.
Exactly.
But actually I'm a stay-at-home dad and she's the full-time worker.
Yeah.
And I know that sounds weird to a lot of people, but it actually works perfect for us. Like she sits there, if she's home more than 2 days, she's like, I have no clue how you even do this. Like,
Yep. I'm the same way. I'm a worker bee. Yeah. When it's like everything's just stale, I can watch Netflix for a day or two, but then I feel unemployed. I'm like, okay, I gotta do something. So yeah.
So tell me a little bit about when you really started doing it, like, you know, on your own pretty much, or really started doing it full time, and how was the process of that?
Yeah, when him and I first started dating, I was working for an insurance company downtown Portland, and like I said, he had taken that position as a matchmaker for the local smoker show. That Jim decided they didn't want to put on shows anymore, and literally he called me at work one day and he says, "Hey, we're gonna start putting on these shows instead." And I was like, "No." I was always the no, and he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Okay." And we actually that was 2000 and excuse me, I have some allergies today. That was 2010, and we got married that year, and we opened up a gym 3 days later, or we took over a gym 3 days later in Kelso. And so long story short, we ended up having 2 shows almost monthly happening between Vancouver, Washington and Kelso, Washington, which is about, a half an hour drive from each other. But we would have smoker shows at both locations. And we did that for quite a while. We started putting on bigger shows, more competitive, non-smoker type events in Oregon. In like 2011 and 2012. And we ended up leaving at the gym, and we ended up giving the ownership back to the gym. That was a whole other story. But we started doing smokers again in Vancouver only. And eventually we started working with a local guy. And my ex decided that we had split up at that time, and he had decided that he was kind of burnt out on the whole thing. And we were in a meeting at one point with the owner of that gym, and he said, Heather's going to take over matchmaking, of which we had not had that discussion. We had not had that discussion. I was like, I am. He's like, yeah, you're more than capable. I'm like, okay. Yeah, I was just, yeah. And so, and that's how I've gotten a lot of ways in my career so far, is that it's just like, yeah, I can, the guy looked at me and he's like, can you do it? And I said, yeah, I can do it. And I have been ever since, but that was 2013, I believe, was my first solo event, as matchmaker, as promoter, as all of that, just using that guy's gym space and whatnot, and working in conjunction with him. And I went on from there to, I ended up leaving that smoker show and went and started doing matchmaking for Prime Fighting. They were a pro-am organization in Ridgefield, Washington at Clark County Event Center. I ended up leaving there and matchmaking for King of the Cage. And that was around 2014, 15. I want to say 15, actually, 2015. While I was working for them, my current boss messaged me and was like, hey, you put on some really good events. And I'm like, well, thank you, and he's like, we'd like you to come work for us, at the FCFF. And that was a dream of mine. I mean, it was the first event I'd ever been to. I mean, I remember sitting there thinking this has to be illegal, but I also remember sitting there saying, I want his job. Like, I want to be able to put on something like this and have all these people come. And as an event planner, I was excited about that idea. And so the idea of working for him, and, they're the oldest promotion in Oregon. They started back in 2001, 2002, when they actually regulated the sport and formed the commission. So they're the pioneers of it here in Oregon. And so and that is owned by Kevin Keeney and Chael Sonnen. So Chael Sonnen is partnered in that. So I started working for them. I left my King of the Cage job. I only did 2 shows there, and I said, okay, I accept. And I came over to the FCFF in 2015, late 2015. And then in 2016, got an email from Chael saying, hey, we're going to do a this is very important. I want to emphasize how this email went, okay? Because Chael is a man of very few words, and I think he expects people to translate what he has going on up here. And he basically said to me, hey, Heather, we're going to put on a grappling show, just like what you do right now for FCFF. And so, do you want to just do the same thing for the grappling show that you do for the FCFF? And, does that sound good? It's just like, basically like 1-2 sentences max. And I'm like, yeah, because, and you always say yes, and then you figure it out. I had no grappling experience. I had no jiu-jitsu experience. I mean, I knew what it was, but I was a shiny white belt at best, and I said, yeah, sure. And then Submission Underground was born. So,
okay.
And then, so I'm still working for Kevin and Chael, but that all started 2015, 2016. Yeah.
So let me ask you this. When you had your very first match, not match, but your very first show. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure everything went off without a hitch.
I'm going to brag for a minute because honestly, it really did. It really did. The events had not been selling out. They had not been, they'd been doing good, but they hadn't been doing great. And not only did we oversell basically that night, but the first fight was like fight of the night. I mean, if you missed it, you shouldn't have, it was amazing. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, like I sat there, my mom came, it's like, come out to my first show,
Mom's like, oh, I'm so proud.
Yeah, she was great. She used to do ticket sales for my ex and I when we had our own show, so she was always supportive. But yeah, it was like, this is my first show, like come out. And so I invite everybody, come on out. And it was just from start to finish, it was an amazing card. Yeah, I was very, very, very lucky with it. So, and I formed great relationships with all of the coaches and stuff. And back then, my ex-husband was a very big guy. He was a pro heavyweight fighter, so he was like 6'4" and 350 probably or more. He was a big guy, and people would recognize me with him, but away from him, it was like, I know you, but from where? And in the midst of our divorce and then me taking over the shows, I made it a top priority to literally just go and introduce myself. Or sometimes I wouldn't even introduce myself. I just walk and be like, hey, and because I remember who they were. And I'd see, every once in a while I'd see them go, hi, and I just ran with it because it was like, I needed them to, I told my mom, I said, if I don't show up and I don't completely put myself in these people's faces, this business moves so fast that in 6 months they're going to forget me, I mean, I didn't exist, and I'd seen it happen a lot with, breakups in the industry, and, usually somebody leaves the industry and it's usually the girl, because the girl usually doesn't have that, place in the sport, so to speak. And I was like, no, I've worked my ass off, I've had my own gym, I've had my own show, I've had my own fight, I've worked my ass off. I want to continue doing this. And so I did. I went to every single promotion, every single show that was held in Oregon, Washington, and I would go there. And what I would also do is I would work with the local media company. At the time, it was MMA Madhouse. They were out of Bend, Oregon. And so I would get a media pass through them. So I would sit cage side at these events, which put me right where I wanted to be, to shake hands with everybody and be seen, And so I would take results, and then I got a whole bunch of friends on Facebook and stuff because of that. People wanted to know the results, and I was posting them in real time. And so I was able to make a name for myself as a resource, but also someone who was everywhere. And I became popular, famous in that way a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it was strategic. And you probably know the coach that I go to over here, Checker Past MMA, Jimmy Jeanette.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah, the 6'8" heavyweight. Yes, I love Jimmy. Yeah.
Well, which is funny is because because it's funny is because I'm 6'5".
Yeah.
And I'm 470.
Okay. Yeah.
And I still have to, and it's kind of weird when you're 6'5" and you still
you're
just
not used to doing that.
You just have to, like hold your eyes up a little bit more, and you're like, nah, this just isn't right. But matter of fact, so now I actually want to talk to you. Like you said, you went into the King of the Cage.
Yes.
Why didn't you like that promotion that much? I mean, you don't have to get into,
No, I loved the promotion. Honestly, well, I will say this. I loved working for King of the Cage. I loved to be in the person that was matchmaking for King of the Cage. That was a prestigious thing to have. What happened with that was interesting. I had gotten a phone call from a guy named Al Jocelyn, who at the time was the matchmaker for King of the Cage. And he called me, and I was at my day job in Milwaukee, and I was working for the water district at the time. And he called me, and I happened to be on lunch break, and he says, I don't know why I'm calling you, but people keep telling me to call you. He's like, I need fighters. We're putting on our first event at Chinook Winds Casino in Lincoln City, and he says, we need fighters. And I'm told that I'm supposed to call you. And I said, yeah, I know fighters. I mean, I know plenty of people that would love to be on that card. He's like, okay, well, and this was like a month out from their first event. So not panic time, but, time to make sure that the card's getting built, of course. And I was working for Prime Fighting at the time, but we were having some disputes amongst the ownership and myself, and
technical difficulties.
Technical difficulties. Exactly. We call those egos technical difficulties. The promotion's not around anymore. So anyway, but I made a good decision. I made a good decision. I feel validated. Anyway, but no, I end up leaving. I left Prime Fighting actually on 2 weeks' notice from their show, which is not something I would normally do. That's very unprofessional, but it hit escalated to a certain point that I needed to do that. So I did. And I was left wondering what next, what now, because I had never not transferred over to another show or had my own show, to go to. And so I kind of felt lost, and I got his call. No, I got his call before I left Prime Fighting. I was still working for Prime when he called me. But then fast forward like a couple weeks later, it's literally a week and a half maybe before their first show. And he called me in a panic, and he says, I need to get fighters, and I have like 3 fights for this card. And, with casinos, there's usually a contract of at least 8 to 10. Sometimes they even require that one of them's a female bout. There's certain stipulations that casinos usually put on you. Because they have to make sure that their audience is getting, consistent behavior, so to speak. So, so he's like, please help me. Like, I need your help, blah, blah. I need to get at least 3 more fights, and with the commission, with the Oregon State Athletic Commission, you have to have everyone licensed, usually at the latest 4 days before the event. So we have like less than a week to make this happen. Yeah. And, but luckily I was not working for, anyone at the time. I was a free agent. And so, I said, yeah, I'll do it. And I went home that day, and I made like mass amount of calls. And long story short, we ended up with 6 fights, which was pretty dang impressive.
Including the 3 that he already had.
Well, so he had said that he had 3, but he ended up only having 2. So it was just because they had to be licensed, and it was this whole thing. But and fighters are flaky sometimes. But we ended up the first show that we did there was 6 fighters. The owner showed up to that event. His name is Terry Treblecock, and I believe that he's still actually the owner of King of the Cage. But he showed up to that event, and he came up to me and he says, I understand that you saved our ass with the casino. I said, and I was so nervous because to me, King of the Cage was like the mini UFC. In 2015, I was like, I was
actually going to say that to you. I remember, in the early 90s, it was UFC. And then King of the Cage came along, and that was, you had a few other, small ones like World Combat and a couple different things like that popped up on the old, pay-per-view. But mostly it was King of the Cage and UFC.
Mostly, yeah. I mean, in fact, they're still very competitive with the UFC, which I think is, the UFC has definitely got that under lock. But
yeah, but just like I was talking with somebody the other day, I forget what fighter it was, but he did make a good point. He goes, it's not that UFC is the best. He goes, they're just the biggest.
Yep.
He says because he had he trains people out of Extreme Couture down Las Vegas, and he had one of his fighters fighting in the PFL, and he goes, you'll see people leave the UFC and go over to like to the PFL and just get demolished. He goes, so it's not that the UFC is the best fighters; they're just the biggest name, biggest name.
Yeah.
So excuse me.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right though. I mean, but no, when Terry walked up to me, he says, he said, you apparently saved us, at the casino, and then he offered me the job of the Oregon matchmaker. Al had came in from California, and I of course happily accepted, and he wrote me a very nice check, as a thank you. And I literally went in the hallway and I called my mom. I was probably like, I'm not gonna, okay. I had some tears in my eyes. I was like, Mom, I made it. I was so, in hindsight, it's kind of funny, but like at the time it was a big deal. I was just like, I saved King of the Cage. Like, but of course, if you know your Oregon history, the FCFF originally had a show at Chinook Winds Casino called Caged on the Coast, and that happened around circa 2009, 10, I think it was, maybe 10.
Yeah, I was still living in Florida at that point in time.
So they only did about, I think, 8 shows there. And then the ownership or the management of the casino decided they didn't want to do cage fights. And so we stopped doing, or FCFF stopped doing them there. And then it wasn't until, what is that? WFC with Matt McGovern came in for one show. And then King of the Cage came in. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Matt McGovern, he's out of, I think he mostly resides out of Reno or Vegas, one of the two, but WFC. But anyway, he did one show there. It was outdoors and it was horrendous heat. It was like one of the hottest days in Oregon. We all got sunburned. And then in 2015, King of the Cage show.
For some reason, people that think that it's a good idea to have any kind of sporting event outside. I mean, I don't even understand like football. Like people will just go out there and sit for like 4 or 5 hours, in the blazing sun.
It's beyond me, but not my thing.
Yeah, I was sitting there and done a show not that long ago with Brittany Elkins of the PFL. And she said her very first match was like in Oklahoma or Utah or somewhere like that. And it was an outside event. And she says, I don't think if you know anything about this place, but it's mosquitoes galore. And she said they had the big construction lights out there to light the whole place up.
No.
She said so there was just like swarms of mosquitoes around the lights. And then she said the mat started getting dewy.
Oh, no.
So, yeah. No more outside.
Amateur fighters got stories. They really do. It's just, yeah.
So please go on. Every once in a while I have to do a little sidetrack and my brain just goes.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, no. So I matched my first official card like in full with King of the Cage in 2015, and it was a great card. I mean, I was pretty proud of it, and it's actually still one of my favorite cards to this day that I've done. It was a lot of fun. I put the best that I knew to be the best in Oregon. I put on that card, and within my ability financially and all of that. But yeah, shortly thereafter, I got a message from Kevin Keeney with the FCFF, and he said, hey, great card. You're doing really good things over there, and we'd love to have you join the FCFF if you consider it. I met up with him, and he said I'd be taking over his job, which was an honor that I couldn't even imagine. And I said yes, and which was a hard decision because I was working for King of the Cage, and I'm telling Kevin's secrets here. Kevin said something to me, that day when I met with him, and he said, if you're on the fence, he says, I'll say this much. He says, King of the Cage, yes, it's a big name. And he says, but a lot of promotions, as you've seen, and just, I'd only been in the sport for 5-6 years at that point. And he says, as you've seen, there's been a lot of promotions that come and go. And he says, in the state of Oregon, especially. And he says, I can't guarantee you the biggest highlights, of the world, but I can tell you that we're not going anywhere. And for me, having recently jumped from Prime to King of the Cage and feeling like that, like unemployment little area, that was important to me. Stability and having his job was of the utmost importance. So yeah, I actually took a pay cut, actually.
Did you?
I did.
Okay, let me ask you a question. At that point in time, was that your full-time job now? Was promoting fights? Or did you still?
It was not my full-time job, actually. I started working for the Water District in 2012. Actually, right after my ex and I got divorced, I got that job. And I stayed working at the Water District until 2 months before the pandemic.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Yeah, I quit my job right before the pandemic. Yeah.
Hey, I want to say, which wasn't good for any kind of entertainment.
Oh man, I was like, I can finally do this full time. Yeah, no.
Did you go back to the water board and be like, hey?
No, gosh, no. My pride would never allow for it. But I'm not gonna lie about it. No, but no, I still work for me at home. I'm still. Yep.
Yeah, but you also, in looking at your Facebook and things, you're doing other promotions, like you said too. You're doing what, submission
underground, yeah.
Submission underground, and is that the only one you're doing, or?
Yes, and Submission Underground actually has not been on since December, so we were doing them. So when the pandemic hit, we had our last FCFF in March of 2020. March 6th, we skirted right by.
Yeah.
We skirted right there on that tail end before the pandemic really flourished. But we were doing almost monthly shows for Submission Underground. We had a show, I think February 11th prior to that, and we had one scheduled March 29th.
Yeah.
And at the time, we were
doing that was very big, because you would always sit there and see that they was having shows and matches and stuff too.
Yeah.
Was that part of you also?
Huh?
Was that part of you also making sure all that, or is your job mostly pairing fighters?
No. With Submission Underground, I was the matchmaker, as well as I was basically Chael's right hand man with Submission Underground. It's like I handled. I did the matchmaking, I did the athletic travel, I did all the paperwork, I did, just so many things behind the scenes with that. I did all the graphic design, I did all the poster work, I worked with UFC Fight Pass for all of that kind of stuff. Submission Underground was my baby. Like, Chael really handed that to me and said, hey, I'm going to be the face of this, and that's going to do a lot for the promotion, obviously. He says, but you're going to be running this event, and he handed it to me, and it was my baby. It really was. So
like you said, once the pandemic really hit, it just put a halt on, especially submission.
Yeah, well, so yes and no. So we, obviously the FCFF is, so in Oregon, Oregon State Athletic Commission regulates MMA, whether it's amateur, professional. They want to regulate kickboxing as well, Muay Thai. So you can't have a kickboxing show at your local MMA gym in Oregon. I mean, OSAC won't allow it. And so, but they don't regulate jiu-jitsu. They don't regulate grappling and wrestling. So if it's pro wrestling, yes, they do. But amateur wrestling and jiu-jitsu tournaments, you'll see these sub-league tournaments that Impact Jiu-Jitsu puts on. None of that is regulated by the state. You can put those on anywhere and everywhere. So you'll see a lot of gyms doing that. They'll have like a little tournament in their, gym. So with that said, when Submission Underground came to birth in 2016, what we would do is we would put on FCFF Saturday night, and then on Sunday we would put on Submission Underground at the same venue, Roseland Theater, and so we'd be like a double event weekend. But it was only happening.
Makes sense. I mean, you're already there. You have a venue. You have everything already there set up. Why not?
Already there. Yep. I mean, people know where to go, and But the FCFF was happening like quarterly, maybe 4 or 5 times a year, depending. Whereas Chael was trying to lock in Submission Underground into like almost like a TV deal where it was like weekly is what his preference was. I was like, no. I'm like, because I was still working. I'm like, weekly. Yeah, okay. That was a lot. But
just doing all the promotions on that alone. Heck, if you're just making posters just for every week, that's going to take up a lot of your time.
Yeah, and I was doing all the mini graphics and everything. I mean, it was a lot, but you know, it was okay. I loved it, but I loved being like a huge part of it, you know, and that way. But no, when the pandemic hit, Chael had talked about. So I quit my job back in January of that year, and at the time, FCFF was happening 5 times a year, give or take. And Submission Underground was happening like 6 to 8 times a year. And I'm not sure if I'm familiar, but Cage Sport up in Washington, which is the pro show up there, it was up at the Emerald Queen Casino in Tacoma. They've been around for a very long time. They also ran a boxing promotion up there as well.
Yeah, the only one that I'm familiar with up there is what is it, Absolute Value?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, Cage Sport was pretty much the FCFF of Washington, but like pro. Like we don't really do a lot of pro fights at FCFF. But so all the pros the amateurs that would graduate from us would go up to Washington and fight in Cage Sport, you know, as a pro, it was cool, you know. But they had a guy that worked for them for years as the matchmaker named Rich Guerin, and he unfortunately passed away. And when he passed away, they needed a matchmaker, and they contacted me. And my ego inflated, and I was like, yes, I will totally run Submission Underground, FCFF, and this pro show. I will be the trifecta of the Northwest. I was so excited. I went up there, I nailed the interview, if I do say so, and they hired me. And I knew that if I got hired by them, I was going to quit my job, because to me it was like, you know, they had all these ideas of all these shows that were going to happen in Tacoma at the Emerald Queen Casino, but then they also wanted to expand and do other promotions. They had one in Oregon down there at the Seven Feathers Casino. They would do once a year. And then they also had them in Yakima, Washington. And so anyway, I literally was set in 2020 alone, I was going to have over 22 shows that I was going to be doing. And I'm like, oh, I can't go wrong.
Yeah, that's what?
It's a lot of money. It was going to be a lot of money. I was just like, yes. And I walked in, and I was, you know, we just had new management at my day job. And even though all the benefits were there, I mean, it was a government job. It was a great job, you know, financially and everything else. But I was over it, you know, and I was like, I'm going to live my dream, you know. And yeah, I quit January of 2020. And, you know, I did one show with King of the Cage before the pandemic hit. It was like late February. And then I did the FCFF. We had a sold out event. And then we were set to do Submission Underground on March 29th. And then the pandemic hit, and Chael Sonnen said to me, and the world said, you know, the show goes on. And it did. Chael actually kept me afloat for the entire pandemic. We did shows monthly. We did grappling shows monthly because we didn't have to worry about the commission.
Okay.
And now I will tell you, the Roseland Theater didn't allow it. The Roseland Theater said, no, like the governor says we're shutting down, and we're shutting down, you know. And Chael, being his Wild West self, him and Kevin put their heads together. And now, mind you, they were working with UFC Fight Pass. So the show was being aired on UFC Fight Pass. And I said, Chael, won't we get arrested? Because, you know, I mean, you know, everything that was happening on TV and everything, you're thinking you're going to get arrested, you know. And he says, let him bring handcuffs, Heather. And I said, okay. And he told me,
I
wish I could
two or just one pair.
Right?
Just bring a pair for him.
Chael's something else. But no, he told me, he says, Heather, he says, when this is all said and done, you're going to call your mom and you're going to tell her that you're a legend. And I'm like, okay. Not sure that's the way I chose to be a legend, but okay. And sure enough, they must have changed venues like 3 or 4 times, I think, because people were finding out and reporting and everything else. I mean, it was at the height of COVID. I mean, it was March 29th. It was at the height of it. And of course, we were advertising because we wanted people to watch. But there was phone calls that were happening. Phone calls were being made to me. Phone calls were being made to Chael, to Kevin. And they're like, what are you doing? Are you insane? We had all these we had Carlos Condit scheduled. We had Jake Ellenberger. We had Roxanne Modafferi scheduled. And people kept dropping off the card like flies. They're like, we don't want to get in trouble. Like, we don't want to be flying. You're not supposed to be flying right now, blah, blah. Jake Ellenberger did show up. he showed up. And we called in like a bunch of local people and a couple of celebrities that said, screw it, we're coming. And we had that show at what Chael called the grain silo. But it was a wedding venue out in the middle of BFE. It was so secret that they wouldn't tell me where it was. And I'm like, you guys want me there, but you ain't tell me where it is. They're like, look. And so we had to meet up at a hotel. All the fighters stayed at this hotel in Wilsonville. And I was told to meet there. And then we would all get shuttled in. Like, that wasn't an obvious thing. It looked like a funeral procession back when there was nobody on the highway. I mean, literally, I'll never forget, I was white knuckle driving it to that hotel. And I was just like, because there's nobody on the road. It was the most eerie thing. I mean, it was at the height of the pandemic and all the signs are saying, stay home, and I'm just like, oh my God, I'm going to go to jail today. And, I got there and it was just a very eerie mood. Everybody was just like, and we did. Luckily, the venue was one exit away from where the hotel was. So we all had to funeral procession it onto the highway and then just a little jaunt take the next exit. And then it was probably about a mile from there. But I couldn't tell you how to get there again. Honestly, it was
pretty much like a Black Ops
submission fight. Had a super, super long entryway. Probably I want to say like a mile entryway to get up to the actual venue from the gate. And Chael told me, he's like, look, I got a lawyer ready at the gate if I need one. And, this show's going to happen. And I was just terrified. And I will tell you this much, the show happened. And after the show happened, I saw something that I had never seen before. I looked over, Chael came out of his commentary room. He had a room where he was commentating live on UFC Fight Pass. And he came out of the room and he looked at Kevin, he looked at me, and there was a couple other production guys there. And there was a look of just like, we did it. It was like, just like this overall, like, like, holy shit, we did it, and then I was just like looking at him like, wait, you were worried? Because I was worried. You weren't supposed to be worried, but yeah, that was March 29th. And we literally did shows every single month after that, up until December of this last year. So yeah. And one December we did 2 shows in 1 month. I had like 8 days notice to match a card back to back at Christmas time. That was fun, but that's what it's like working for Chael. So
so what's going on with them now?
I don't know. At the end of December, our contract ended with UFC Fight Pass. It was just, the length of time it was up. And they did not renew us, and I'm not sure the logistics of that. I tend to stay out of that. It's not. Yeah. But I do know that Chael is still shopping it around and stuff. I mean, he's still that's still his baby and stuff, and so. But luckily, when that all happened, we did our first FCFF show after the pandemic that same month in December, and we've had 2 sold out shows since then. And then we have our next one coming up August 26th. But yeah, so FCFF's kept me busy as well. So
Yeah, it surprises me that some of these people don't go onto like YouTube or something like that and have like a $5 a month subscription
Yeah.
to be able to so they can put their fights on. Something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I know that we have aired back in at SUG 7, I think, and I think we're now at SUG 29, or it'll be 30 the next one we do. But back at SUG 7, we had been with Flow Grappling for the 1st through the 6th show. And we were not with UFC Fight Pass yet. And so I think for 2 shows back to back, we were on Chael's YouTube channel. So
yeah, why not? I mean,
got a lot of followers. So yeah.
I watch this one guy about crypto, and it's funny. Like, you sit there and watch him, and he doesn't ask anybody to donate anything. People just does it freely. And I'm sitting there like, he does an hour show a day, and easily, like, just a dude that only has like maybe 1,000 people watching, he'll pull in almost like $800 to $1,000. Seven times, do a show every day. That's $7,000 a week.
Yeah. Well, yeah. No, I mean, the problem is like the second show that we ever did for Submission Underground was through Flow Grappling, and I think Chael and Flow Grappling and whoever else was behind the scenes was trying to kind of flex what the possibility was for Submission Underground. It was a second show, and so it was headlined by John Jones versus Dan Henderson, and Misha Tate and Jessica I, and I mean, it had Jeff Monson on that card.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it was a big card. I'm trying to remember everybody else that was on the card.
That right there just the star, lineup anyways.
What was that?
I said that right there just sounds like a star lineup anyways.
It was. It really, really was. It was incredible. And it was during December. And we had to have John Jones missed his flight in New Mexico. Jessica I's flight got rerouted back to Ohio because of the weather. Misha was in Singapore. I mean, it was a struggle just to get everybody there, and it happened, and it was amazing. But you can imagine what the expense of that event was just for John Jones alone. Was insane. People were mad at us because the venue, the Roseland Theater, only held 1,000 people, and 950, something like that with fire marshal. But and I think a lot of people didn't believe it was really happening. Chael talks a lot and the names, and it's just and how the internet is. So it's like, I think a lot of people just didn't think it was happening, and by the time people realized it's actually happening, the show was sold out. I mean, of course. I mean, and what's even crazier is that Chael did not change the ticket prices for that show, and so people got into that show for $20 for general admission. Oh
wow.
Yeah. I mean, and people were scalping our tickets on Craigslist for like $2,000. I was like, I'm an employee, but I had like 25 tickets in my purse, and I was like,
hey, you're sitting there thinking,
I told my friends, I'm like, you might have to watch it online.
I mean, $1,000 a ticket, you got 25.
Scalp my own tickets. Yeah.
I'd even scalp yours and be like, hey.
There was a time that I had over 20, maybe 30 posters in my truck at one point from the event, and with signatures on it. And yeah, not on all of them, but on some of them, but John Jones stuff. And I kicked myself. I don't know what happened to those posters, but God, I could have probably made something off of it. But
don't you? The stuff that you've,
the hindsight stuff, you're like,
yeah.
There was a fighter that fought the night before in the FCFF because it was a double event weekend. Michael Collazo. He won his title fight that night. And what we would do, we would help advertise for Submission Underground by having the fighters weigh in at the start of the FCFF. So we'd be like, hey, if you want to see these guys grapple tomorrow, get your tickets tonight, right? Marketing 101. So he had just won his belt. And so he came with me the next day with his belt. And of course, the fighters had seen him fight because they had stuck around and watched the show. And so he has a belt from the FCFF that's signed by Henderson and Monson and John Jones and Misha. And I mean, it's just insane,
That's pretty cool.
It's way cool.
That's something I'm sure he's not getting rid of. Yeah, I'm sure he's not getting rid of that belt.
No. So I just was like, I was jealous. I'm like, that's amazing. And I had Chael sign it too, because, why not? But
yeah, I know I'm going to add either another C or take a C off. The FCCC.
FCFF stands
FCF.
for Full
Okay.
Contact Fighting Federation. Yep.
Yeah, then I just totally messed up. Yeah, I was adding C's and not
That's all right.
yeah,
There's so many promotions with acronyms. I'm sure you hear many of them. Yeah.
That's when the dyslexia comes in, and it's just like, you know. But, so you said that's just for non-pro fighters?
You know, so they started doing their first pro fights back in 2015. My ex-husband actually was the first pro fighter there. It's sporadic. I mean, maybe once a year, if that. I mean, it's very, like, it has to be, as Kevin says, it has to be the right fight. It has to make sense. You know, it's like, and that of course means that you have to make sure the fans show up for it.
Yeah. I mean, but that does make sense. But I mean, you know, everybody's got to have a jumping off point, you know, and it sounds like, you know, they've been around so long, you know, why not, you know, that could be like a, you know, like the Grand Ole Opry of Oregon MMA, I guess, you know, it's one of those things that you want to get onto, so, you know, you can jump off to the next.
It's always been that way. Yeah. I mean, there's a frustration with that. I mean, a lot of people feel like they're validated to go pro by having an FCFF title. And that's a double-edged sword. Like we like knowing that we have people that want to be in our show and have that validation. But at the same time, sometimes these guys will get the belt and then you never see them again, you know, and back in the day, you know, you weren't a true champion unless you defended your title once or twice at least, you know? And now it's kind of like a cash grab, if you will. It's like, okay, we got the belt, now we're going pro, you know? And so we'll get a champion and then we're like, oh, the title's vacant, you know? It's like, so champion for the night, you know?
Yeah, that's got to be rough. I mean, you know, as soon as you sit there and say that, it's like, yeah, that would just piss me off, you know, as a promoter, as a, you know, the owner of the organization, you know, and obviously you don't be like, well, if you win the belt, you at least have to defend it at least one time, or no?
Promoters have tried to do that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I know there was a promotion in Bend that tried to do that. And they said, you know, if you don't defend your belt, you know, twice, like you have to turn your belt back in. And I'm like, I wouldn't want that belt turned back in at that point. People don't always take care of their belts the way they should or the way you want them to. But I understood the sentiment behind that. But at the end of the day, I mean, a lot of fighters, unfortunately, are very flaky, and a lot of fighters have an agenda, and I get it. And unfortunately, you know, I mean, I do understand. I understand the fact that this sport moves very fast, as we talked about earlier. You know, every 6 months, people forget about you. If you're not active, I mean, the sport just rotates, you know? Yeah. And it's also a young man's sport. You know, you don't have time to, you know, be fighting, you know, for years and years defending your titles and stuff like that. I mean, you got to keep moving. And right now, with the way the UFC has escalated since the early days, with all these different shows, all these different opportunities, and just this huge influx of fighters on their roster. I mean,
yeah, I think they have
you're a needle in a haystack now, you know?
Yeah, I think they have like 650 fighters on their roster.
It's now, well, and with the, what's that? Dana White's Next Contender.
Yeah.
His Next Contender series. With that, he requires fighters to typically, you know, have a certain record or a certain amount of fights, you know, to get in there. Or sometimes they'll say, oh, you know, we'd love to have you, but we need you to win a couple more fights. And so that's where they, you know, come to these promotions and they do that. And then, you know, it's just.
He also has Looking for a Fighter or something like that too.
What was that?
He also has the show Looking for a Fighter, where they go him and Dean Thomas and
okay.
They go look for, you know,
can't keep track of all Danish.
Yeah. But, you know, just like he was bringing up, you can kind of understand from a fighter's point of view, you know, where like, okay, we got this title, we're just going to jump off to the next, you know, the next thing, because one, it is a young man's sport.
Yes.
Two, you know,
yep.
They're probably in their head, are you going to risk an injury for something that might not pay off, you know, in the end?
That's it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
You know, and also that's like, I've been wanting to do a podcast on me just talking about this one subject. It doesn't even have to be a long podcast, but 100% not a Jake Paul fan. But people are so pissed off at him because, oh, he's bringing down boxing and he's doing this. And then finally, I just got tired of, commenting on, and talking to people. Okay, what are you mad about? Because he's an amateur at the pro level? He's doing his whole amateur career at a pro level, making pro money and not going through all the, getting his head busted, 20 fights before he can become a pro. So why are you mad? That's not being dumb. That's being the smartest thing out there.
I mean, I don't claim to know Chael's opinion on this, but Chael's really good at perspectives like that, and the fact that, you might not like the guy, but you're talking about the guy. He's doing something right. He has your attention, and also he's bringing a lot of attention to boxing. That wasn't there. I mean, people hate Floyd Mayweather, but he brought a ton of attention to boxing. I mean, people hated Submission Underground for that matter, for a lot of reasons. They're like, why is John Jones in Submission Underground? He's not even a black belt, blah, blah, blah. This is a grappling show. This is a jiu-jitsu show. And we're like, okay, but do you see jiu-jitsu shows on pay-per-view? Do you see people buying jiu-jitsu shows like they do UFC nights? Like, no. It's like, you have to play the game to elevate the sport sometimes. And a lot of people get offensive. They're like, oh, tradition says this, and this should be this way, and this should be that way. Then you're going to stay where you're at. Yep. You have to constantly be moving, Yeah,
that's just like, I remember hearing this when I was a kid, and it made sense, and it's always stuck to me. Tradition is doing something that you don't know why you do it, but you keep doing it.
Yeah.
Most traditions people can't sit there and say, oh, we've just always done it. And then another thing with like Jake Paul, like, like he's not a real boxer. The dude's been training for like 4 years. One, he has the money to hire whoever he wants to come and train him.
Absolutely.
He's got a heck of a training center where he trains at.
Yep.
So why not? It's like this. Nobody's a boxer until they're a boxer.
Yep.
You can be working at McDonald's, and what if you're just working at McDonald's and you're trained to be a boxer? What, that makes you a boxer? No, you're not a boxer until you're boxing, or you start training, then you start becoming a boxer. Up until then you're just a regular dude.
Well, and the world right now operates off of, if you are marketing ability, you're going to have better opportunity.
Oh yeah,
because there's money behind it, right? I mean, the fact of the matter is that me, who had one amateur fight back in 2011 and got my ass beat, the fact of the matter is that if I called up King of the Cage or someone like that right now and said, I want to fight, I could get a fight. Why? Because of my name. That's it. Not because I have no skill set in it. I have no business being in the cage. But that's not the point. It's like, that's why Conor McGregor is doing these fights with Mayweather. Why? Because people will watch. Should it happen? No.
Just like you brought up, and we both sat there and said, he's, Jake Paul's bringing a name to boxing. If you sit there and think the Mayweather fight and Conor McGregor, since that fight, and that was what, 5-6 years ago?
Yep.
All right. Since then, who's talked about boxing since then? It wasn't until what, Mike Tyson came back that they started talking about boxing again. It wasn't until Jake Paul came on there and just started, it's all those people behind him that are now, pumping up boxing. Yep. So it's a good thing, good or bad, like it or not. Yep. It's still going to stick around, and just like you were sitting there bringing up, not that many people are watching, like, submission fighting, on TV and stuff. Do you see that getting any bigger at any point in time?
I do. Yes. The sport's growing. A lot of promotions are coming along. And there are, a Fight to Win is heavy, and under Flow Grappling's banner. One Fighting Championship started doing matches like that as well. There's lots of different, I've drawn a blank on some of these promotions, but there's lots of promotions out there besides Submission Underground that are actually more esteemed in the sport, so to speak. But the sport needs stars. It needs stars to elevate. It needs stars that are willing to do what Jake Paul's doing, willing to do what Conor McGregor did. And right now you have people like Gordon Ryan, in jiu-jitsu. He's a big name. But if you went and asked your everyday fighter or fight fan who Gordon Ryan is, they might look at you confused. And that's a problem. That tells me there's a lot more room to grow. He's one of the biggest. Yeah. He's like the John Jones of jiu-jitsu. And yet, so if you don't know who that is, then that tells me more about the sport and its marketing potential than about Gordon Ryan,
I will sit there and say this. I knew that he was into jiu-jitsu and I knew that he trained. I just didn't know that he actually competed. But Mario Lopez. From Saved by the Bell. Yeah, he just won some, I forget, but it was a pretty reputable jiu-jitsu tournament. And I was like, oh wow, that's actually kind of interesting. And then I know that our time is almost up here. I was trying to sit there and see what time. When I don't have my glasses on, I can't see crap. But
speaking of the devil, Kevin just called me. I was like, sorry, I didn't mean to look at my phone. I'm like, oh, the boss is calling.
But Heather, before I let you go, is an honor to have you on here. It's actually very cool, because like I said, I do a lot of, different combat sport people, and it's usually on how they got into martial arts and why, and like, what's it doing. Actually, I asked the same 3 questions. Why and how you got into martial arts, what's it doing for you now, and what's the future? Doesn't matter who's on here. It's always the same 3 questions. But, I wanted to sit there and let, get a view of somebody that has to put these things on and things like that. So, that's always cool. And maybe we'll have you back on again at some other time, and we can get into some of your, you have to have stories.
I do. I have lots.
You have to have stories.
I have lots of stories. I always say that's my retirement plan, is I'm going to write a memoir one of these days.
Well, you're probably going to have to, with the way it is now, you might as well start doing it as an audiobook.
I know. Exactly.
Might as well do that.
A whole damn series.
But Heather, before Heather, MMA boss lady?
Boss lady MMA standing.
Yep. It's my dislike. Usually by the time I'm done talking, my brain is already like, hey, you need to shut up. Stop listening to words. But before we let you go, please tell everybody where they can find you at. I'm on social media all under Boss Lady MMA, one word, and that's my handle on most everything. Survive the humidity, but And if you're thinking about your hair's not getting frizzy, think again. It's definitely not happening.
I already know that much. It'll be up on top of my head doing something.
All right, Heather, I'm gonna let you go, and it was a pleasure having you on. Okay.
Yes. Likewise.
Until next time.
Yes. Until next time.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Strange cases, a million ways to fall in love with all of the mistakes. It's a perfect place to keep up with the pace and navigate a maze, meticulously engineered to make a payday. Who are you? What's your deal? What you coming to take? Are you for real?